I'm Eric Chemi, and this is Politely Pushy. Adriel Sanchez, CMO of WalkMe. I'm so excited that we're having this conversation today because I know we've talked before about so much about what WalkMe does, what you do, and a few of these acronyms that I think a lot of people in the real world don't quite know, right? DAP, HCI. These are daily terms for you, but maybe not so familiar for a lot of people out there. So just briefly for the audience, because your background is super interesting, just tell the audience briefly like who you are and how did you get to this position?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you said, Chief Marketing Officer of WalkMe, I've been doing marketing for my entire career, which is about 25 years. I've worked for large companies, small companies, mostly in software, B2B software to be particular. And what attracted me most to WalkMe, other than the fact that there were some new acronyms I could learn, and marketers love acronyms, is the fact that it was a new category of software called digital adoption platforms. And the temptation to join a company who had created this category, and we'll talk about it what it is in just a second, was just too tempting an experience for me to pass up.
Keep going. Keep going. You said we'll talk about it in a second. I
Yeah,
want to hear. I want to hear more.
absolutely. So, what a digital adoption platform is, and again, this category of software didn't exist until we invented it 10 years ago. But when I describe it, I always like to start with the problem that we solve, Eric, because I think the problem resonates with pretty much everybody. When you think about the last couple of decades of investment in technology, we've introduced a massive amount of technology into our organizations. And we've inadvertently created a bit of a mess. When you think about trying to accomplish even simple things in your day-to-day work life, it's often that the software that was intended to help you do your job better has become the job itself. And that's the problem that we help companies solve. So we give them information about what technology, what software has been deployed across their entire organization, who's using it, and whether they're using it the way that you wanted them to use it. And then we allow you to take that information to identify where people are getting stuck, where they're experiencing friction, and deliver guided help in the application, right in the flow of work to help them get their jobs done faster, more efficiently, and with more productivity.
It's funny you say the software has become the job itself. And I think about all the people that if you've worked in any office, there's always that person that is their job, right? It's like, oh, they just sit there and they do, that system all day, or they do the spreadsheets all day, or they don't actually do the thing the company does. They just sit there and they're the only person that knows how the software works. And I envy those people because I think, oh, they've got ultimate job security. They don't really have to talk to everybody. They don't really have management, right? Like they're the only person that knows how that works. So people leave them alone and you're jealous of them. It's like, they're never going to get fired. But now I'm hearing you thinking you're trying to get them fired. You're trying to get rid of those kind of inefficiencies.
Well, single points of failure, as you know, Eric, are highly risky for
Right.
organizations.
Like when that person's off for a day or a week, then nothing gets done.
Yeah, no expenses get processed. The system doesn't get updated with new
Right.
data.
Well, how do you fix that though? Like, how do you go to companies and say, okay, I know you've got too much software or software that doesn't do all these things. Let me offer you another piece of software that you can add on top of all the software that you're trying to sort out right now.
Yeah, the answer to your too much software is just one more piece of software. But I promise you, Eric, it's the last piece of software you'll have to buy. It's an interesting conundrum. The truth is that yes, we are an additional piece of software, but we sit on top of all of the software that your organization is running. And yes, there is an administrator that is building what we call walkthroughs, what we call smart tips, different types of guidance for users, and is looking at all the data that's coming back to create these experiences. But to the end user, right, to Eric, the employee in the organization that's looking to get a job done, he will rarely know that he's even interacting with WalkMe because it's embedded in the applications that he's using every day. It's helping guide him from one application to another. So for Eric, for the average employee, for the 165,000 employees that Deloitte has WalkMe tools deployed on across 100 plus apps, it is invisible, largely invisible to the Deloitte employee. It is highly visible to the administrators that are creating those experiences, but to the employee, it is seamless.
You mentioned Deloitte. Who are some other big company names, customers that you can mention, just so people listening get a sense for, the real giant enterprises that have signed up with WalkMe already?
Absolutely. So we have, and our target are the largest companies in the world, Eric. When you think about the problem that I described earlier, it is amplified by 100-fold when you talk about thousands of employees, hundreds of thousands of employees. So some of the customers that rely on us are Nestle, TUI, which was one of the largest travel management companies in the world. We have also a customers in the health and insurance providers like, Christus Health, which is in health management. We have Gojo. We have a lot of different organizations spanning many different industries.
Who are you competing against, right? You say, okay, they invented the category 10 years ago. It feels to me that this is the kind of thing that other companies say they can do, right? Just from enough reading and talking to people like, oh, we can help you integrate all these things. So you must have competition. Who is that? And how are you saying, hey, we're the original, we're the best, we invented the space? You're going to come back to the people that have done this longer than anybody.
Yeah, when you think about alternatives to what we do, I would say the number one competition that we have is do nothing. So companies will
Just
go, well,
keep that person doing their spreadsheets all day.
keep that person doing their spreadsheets all day. That's right. So once we get over that kind of, resistance to change and kind of openness to breaking the status quo, there's a couple of different ways that competition comes up. The first is sometimes for some application providers, they have some of these solutions built within their own applications, but they are very basic, very, very rudimentary, and they are specific to the application that that manufacturer is offering. So they don't allow you to cross applications and take a holistic approach to what you're doing. There are also other providers in the digital adoption platform space that compete with us. And we believe we have 60+% of the DAP market, and we believe that our solutions are far superior than theirs from a technology perspective, and also just factually, the number of large-scale implementations that WalkMe has done far exceeds the total large-scale implementations of all of our competitors combined.
How do you market when it's all B2B, right? It's one thing B2C, you market very differently. How do you reach, let's say Deloitte's a good example, or you say the biggest companies in the world, the 100,000 or more employees, but there's like one decision maker that you're trying to get. You got to find that one person, and it's not clear what their role is or who they report to, because it's not necessarily the CEO, right?
Yeah.
It's somebody who can maybe talk to the CEO, but it's not them, and they may have different titles: the CIO, the CTO, the CFO, the COO, or somebody underneath them. How do you market in such a difficult, needle in a haystack kind of environment?
Yeah, a little bit of this is what I've been doing my entire career. And what I've seen is that it used to be a needle in a haystack. But the individual it's rarely one individual who is making these decisions these days at these large enterprises, Eric. It's typically a buying committee. And whereas those buying committees, even 10 years ago, used to be composed of 3 or 4 people, today it could be a dozen or more people who are involved in the discussion. So what you got to do is make sure that you are surrounding that buying team with messaging that is going to resonate with each of those individuals, from the influencer all the way down to the key stakeholders, all the way up to the actual person who has authority to sign the check.
Because any one of them can say no, and then the whole thing is over.
Any one of them can say no, depending on their level of influence. An influencer can say no, and a decision maker would say, okay, well, I really trust Eric's judgment. He's never steered me wrong, so I'm not going to go forward. It could be a decision maker or who says, yeah, like the influencers aren't that influential, and he or she may have a different thought on how to solve the problem.
Is it typically a bottoms up approach, or is it top down? Like, do you try to go to the highest person and have them convince the people below them, or do you try to go to the person on the ground level more so and have them convince their bosses and the more senior people on that decision committee?
It's a little bit of both. And what we've actually found most helpful is we start with solving the problem that I described to you. Find a narrow use case where that problem is really hurting organizations. So let's say that you're in a sales organization and you have a hard time with the accuracy of the data that's going into your system for forecasting. So it makes it very, very hard for you to predict where your business is going to be next quarter or the quarter after that. That might be because of some adoption challenges with the software that your sellers are using to put that information into the system. If I can solve that important but narrow use case for you, I can start to prove value, and then I can solve the next problem for you, and the next one, and the next one. And then it gets to a point where I can start to solve problems that aren't specific to sales. There might be problems that are more relevant for the entire organization, such as in the HR department.
Right.
And then the IT organization can start to say, wow, we've got this solution now across a couple of different departments. Maybe this should be an enterprise-wide deployment, and we can solve everybody's problems.
I think about an everybody problem, like you mentioned earlier, like the expenses don't get done, right? Taking days off, expenses. I give those examples. I know we've touched on this before. Everybody, whether you're in sales or not, right? Everyone is dealing with that, and they seem very cumbersome, right? There seems like so many touch points to get an expense approved, get a day off approved, and then notified across the company. Are those very common applications that you're working on with clients, or what's the most common problem that companies are trying to get solved?
Absolutely. The ones that you mentioned are very common in the HR department. There are other problems that are very common in sales organizations, such as the process for getting something from, like, I found an opportunity, all the way through collecting cash from that customer. So there are some very common, there's about 24 or so very, very common use cases across sales, HR, and IT management that we find. The other thing that I would say is that there's also larger initiatives inside of organizations that we are often attached to. Organizations have very, very large digital transformation projects that often require, as an example, upgrading a system from one version to the next. And oftentimes, that software upgrade has massive implications on the end users, right? The screens look different. The way that you execute a process may be different. I'll give you an example of Salesforce. When you move from Salesforce to Salesforce Lightning, it often causes a lot of friction on, sellers just having to do things in a slightly different way and having to learn new ways of inputting information into the system. We had a customer by the name of Gojo, I mentioned earlier.
Yep.
Right? Like 90% reduction in time to proficiency when they moved from one system to another. So you talk about like the seamless upgrade process, right? And that's just one application. Now think about if you're upgrading various applications at the same time, and you as Eric are walking into, there's a new HR system, there's a new CRM system, there's a new system for submitting your expenses. It becomes a lot to tackle.
I'm hearing this, thinking about time to proficiency, reducing that number. It's obviously human computer interaction here, right? How are humans using the computer to get what they need to get done? And like you said before, it's almost like the computer was taking over the whole job. We were forgetting the point. It's like, and now related, no interview can happen these days without talking about AI. I hear all this and think, okay, but AI is supposed to solve all of this, right? That's what the hype says. That's what the myth is. Yeah. Where do you find yourself in that conversation? Is the myth, the hype real? Is it, oh my gosh, we're going to start using AI to do all these things, or, we've been doing it already, or AI is never actually going to solve these things because you need a real solution like ours? Or where do you find yourself in that spectrum?
We do believe the hype is real. So I think that we are not that far off from a very transformative experience in how we interact with computers. Now,
is that good for you guys then? Does that put you out of business, or are you going to be the one providing the AI that does that?
It is absolutely good for us, and I'll tell you why. The massive amount of change that is about to be introduced into organizations because of, one, new AI capabilities in their existing tools, two, new AI first tools that will be introduced to organizations. That level of change management, companies are going to have to get ahead of it. And we've been in the change management business for 10 years now, Eric. That's one of our biggest use cases. So we can help organizations introduce these new tools to their employees in a way that delivers on the promise of productivity without introducing risk. One of the biggest concerns that chief information security officers have today is, with all of this explosion of AI, am I introducing risk into my organization? We can ensure that you are adopting these tools responsibly but also getting the value that you need out of them. So that's one. Number two, we've been doing AI for years. We've purchased AI companies. AI is not new for WalkMe. So we're going to continue to, with the acceleration of AI capabilities, we're going to continue to invest in capabilities within our own tool that allow our customers to get more value out of WalkMe. And then thirdly, we believe that the future of human computer interactions is going to require a system like a digital adoption platform to serve as the system of delivery for the capabilities that are nested inside of all of these tools that are rampant around your organization.
How much AI are you using internally, right? To work on your own development, right? For the WalkMe software, the WalkMe employees, how much, it's almost like a meta question, right? Like a circular one. How much AI are you using yourself to develop the tools that you're then pushing out there?
Absolutely. So I'll just give you a perfect example of AI tools. When you have a system, a piece of software that you're interacting with on a screen, try to take your cursor and make the screen smaller. What happens to the buttons on that screen? Don't they move around?
Mm-hmm.
Our AI our AI automatically detects where that button has moved. So if you want to provide guidance on Eric, push this button here, whether it's on the left-hand side of the screen or the right-hand side of the screen, AI powers that element recognition for us to understand.
So let me do this on my screen. So tell me, so I'm resizing one of my windows. Is that what I'm doing?
You're resizing one of your windows and you can see that things are moving around.
Yep.
Our AI detects because it understands the software the way that a human would understand it.
Right.
And it knows that when you have a button that says submit in a certain context, not in any context, but in that context, that button just moved from the top to the top right.
And is that good or bad? You want it to move or you don't want it to move?
No. My point is that when you are looking at a piece of software,
right,
as Eric, right, you know that if a button moves from one place to another, you know that it's the same button.
Right.
But teach a computer to do that is not as simple.
Oh, I see. Right. Because it gets stuck much more on like the pixels of like
Exactly
20 pixels from the left border, and that's it. I never move.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or let's take it a step further. Let's say that tomorrow your HR system releases a new upgrade, right? And this happens, it's a SaaS platform. It happens in the cloud. You wake up one morning and you've got a new interface.
Right.
WalkMe's element recognition, powered by AI, knows that that button before said submit, but now it might say something slightly different. Or that button before was red and now it's blue.
You got a lot to do then. Because all these things are happening all the time. So for you to be able to keep up with all of this, all these different software programs, all of their updates, context changes, and then what your client organizations want, this must be a never-ending job.
And that's when we started to face this problem 6 years ago. That's when we started to acquire AI technology that was going to help us do this, right? How do we create a sticky experience? When you create a great experience for your employees, how do we make sure that that experience is sticky so that regardless of what happens with the underlying application, we can keep that experience the same for the user?
Where does the industry go in the next 5 years? Now that everybody knows about AI now and everyone's got to say that they're using it and everyone's expecting software to be smarter miraculously. Oh, it can understand everything I do. And we don't need all these people, like all those things. Where do we see DAP, HCI? Where do we see all of this with AI in the next 5 years?
Well, the first is I don't think any of us really know, right? I think we just need to be honest with ourselves. The technology is evolving extremely fast. I was at a conference last week where one of the keynote speakers said the AI that you're using today will be the worst AI you'll ever use in your life. So in 6 months, we'll look back on the cute AI that we had today and be like, oh, that was cute. And in 18 months, it'll be completely different game. So now that being said, I think a couple of things are true. I think a couple of things you can count on. The way that we interact with computers in the future will change. And I think whereas today customers build workflows or choose applications based on usability, based on ability to integrate with other applications, based on certain criteria that have been time and tested to prove that something is a good investment. I think those criteria will change. I think in the future, what will be most important is the capabilities that that software is providing to you. So if you want to process an expense report, what's most important is what is the capability for a user to enter information? What is the capability for me to take that information and validate it? The capability to deliver that information to a bank, and the capability to pay the employee their reimbursement amount. Those are the capabilities. And whether that capability sits in one application, Eric, or in 5, it won't really matter, because there will be a system of delivery
It won't
that
matter to
knows.
who, because it'll matter to somebody though. Like you said, if it sits in one system or 5, it won't matter to who.
To the purchasers, to the designers of workflows in organizations, and to the purchasers of the systems,
Right.
what will matter more is the capabilities
Right.
rather than the particular piece of software. Because if the human computer interaction model, and we believe that will sit at the center of all of this, is a system of delivery that will know where these capabilities are hidden inside the organization and bring them together for the user, whether that's across one application or 10. When you think about the simplification of our IT stack, the simplification of our workflows, making this stuff work for the employees, you can either rip and replace your entire infrastructure, right, and rebuild it from the start, or you can have a layer that sits on top that delivers these capabilities to users at the time when they need it most, knows where to find the capabilities and deliver to them. We believe that's going to be called a system of delivery. And we believe that digital adoption platforms are extremely well positioned to serve as that system of delivery for enterprises.
How much data do you have on how people are using the tools in front of them? I'm assuming because you're integrated and embedded, I assume there's some sort of, not data collection or tracking, but just an understanding of these are the hang up points for users, or this is where they're focused on, or maybe as that button moves, this is how long it takes them to chase it. What are some of the data points that you're able to track, and how does that help organizations improve efficiencies for how people are using the computer?
Yeah, 100%. So first, I should say that none of this is PII, right? It's not personally identifiable. It's all based on browser history and machine-to-machine understanding. Now, that being said, last year alone, there were 6.5 billion interactions between users and WalkMe content on the applications that they access every day. 6.5 billion. Right?
What's an example of an interaction?
An example of an interaction is you are processing an expense report, and you are submitting an expense that is out of compliance.
Okay.
And we are presenting guidance to you on how to make that expense report compliant based on the policies of the organization. That is an example.
Okay. So you got 6.5 billion of those in 1 year.
In 1 year,
Okay.
right? Another example would be a seller going through a process of moving an opportunity to a closed won deal, and they need to log that not just in their CRM system, but also in their finance system, guiding that seller immediately and automatically from their CRM system to their finance system, and pre-filling all the information about that opportunity and that deal and that customer that the finance system needs in order to calculate the transaction, allowing the seller to check it and hit submit in a couple of seconds rather than 15 minutes is another example of an interaction.
So I cut you off a little tangent. We know now what an interaction is. You have 6.5 billion of those. It's not PII. So what are those data insights that you have from that?
Yeah, what it allows us to do is train our models for the future of human-computer interactions, right? It allows us to help organizations identify where companies like them are seeing their employees get stuck in workflows, right? It allows us to help pre-configure some workflows for them. Hey, when we've seen this workflow at 100 organizations just like yours, here's where people tend to get stuck. So start here and then customize it for your particular business according to your particular policies, whatever experiences you want for your employees. So it helps customers today get started much, much faster. I think in the future, it gives us an extremely unique data set to train large language models on how we want to translate conversational interfaces, voice or text to text or voice to text, to actually executing actions inside of applications. That data set is going to be the secret sauce that's going to turn some of these open large language models, right, into something that your organization is going to be able to use to actually execute transactions on your workflows, on your applications.
Has there been a most surprising data point or a trend that when your data analysts are looking at something and you're presenting to a client like, oh, I never knew this is how the users were interacting with the software? Something like that stuck to you, at least maybe in a client meeting where a company said, oh, we need to rethink how we're doing this?
I think a couple of things. I think number one, the commonality, I think, between where people get stuck, I think has been fascinating.
Like
right?
across industries, across companies.
Industries, cross companies, like people tend to get stuck in the same places. I think what has also been surprising is despite what many software manufacturers will tell you, the struggles that the average individual has with using applications, especially ones that they use very infrequently. As an example, if you're executing a process in an HR application, like a performance review that you only really do once or twice a year, there's going to be a level of friction inherent in that process, regardless of how simple the interface is. And that is true among 5 generations of workers that we now have in the workforce, right? The digital dexterity out there is completely, it varies widely from employee to employee. The last thing I'll say is the amount of resistance to change, I think, has also been surprising.
Even when high or surprisingly low?
Surprisingly high. Even when you're moving employees from a really, really poor experience to a far superior experience, right? That process of getting them to begin to adopt the new experience is wrought with friction, even if it's like a much, much better experience. We have a customer who moved their employees from green screens, right, onto a graphical user interface. And the employees knew all of the shortcuts. So their resistance to change was massive, even though the new experience was far superior. So you need systems, you need tools to help navigate folks.
But it's like an investment. I get that, right? Because I've worked, in computers, offices, my whole career, and you feel like you put in this investment, learning the shortcuts and the tools and the tricks to this crap software that everybody hates, but I've got an edge now in the company because I figured it out. And now you're going to go and make it easy for everybody, which means that my edge has been eliminated. So I can see why actually the power users don't want that to happen. I've learned all the shortcuts. I know all the tricks. I also wonder a second thing. In a typical environment where I'm here from 9 to 5, the longer I can waste time doing software means I don't actually have to do real work because I'm leaving at 5 regardless. So if you make this too easy for me and too quick, I don't have a place to hide. This took, my expense report now took 3 seconds instead of 30 minutes. Now I have to go back to work. I wonder if there's a psychological thing there where they hated it, but it was sort of like a love-hate thing, right? They loved being able to hate it, and now they don't have that opportunity.
Well, that's one way to look at it, Eric. Another way to look at it is that I can free you up to spend time on more rewarding work.
I think you're right. Right. But I'm just sort of trying to get in the head of like why that friction is there, right? Why the resistance to change, even when you're making it better.
I think psychologically people are just resistant to change, period. Right. Like I think any kind of change. Right.
Do you think that will get better in the next 5 years?
I do. I think that change management, I think, first of all, change will be constant. I think that, this generative AI thing that's just starting to come up is one of the biggest, I think, transformative changes. You think about the major things that have happened, right? The introduction of the World Wide Web, the introduction of mobile, the introduction of cloud and SaaS, right? Like, solutions that you access not like through a server that's sitting in your closet, but via the cloud. Like this is up there with some of them and arguably more transformative. And I think that we can't even begin to predict, right? Like the amount of change that's about to come down the pike. So I think that folks are going to have to get more comfortable with change. And I think organizations have a responsibility to help their employees navigate through that.
Before we go, what's the number one misconception or a myth that, let's say, a possible corporate client has? Let's say they're debating whether or not we're going to bring in WalkMe or we're going to do this whole digital adoption thing, right? They're going through their decision committee. What is the one question you feel like you're having to answer over and over again that companies just don't quite get how this is all going to work?
I think that, and this is becoming less and less of an issue, but I think that, and this is changing, right? I will say, but organizations that are underestimating the impact of the employee experience on their ability to serve your customers, on their ability to do better, more rewarding work, on their ability to be more productive, on their ability to be happier. I think that those are the places where, and again, it's less and less, but those are the places where we have to have a conversation to help people understand the employee experience matters just as much as the customer experience that you spent so much time focused on.
I fully agree with you. I think, again, having worked in a lot of places, you would just sit there and be like, why are we wasting our time with this junky stuff? And how much time is getting wasted because they're not thinking about the employees? And it's like, but the company is literally only existing because of the employees, right? And obviously customers have to pay, but we're the ones doing the work. So I agree with you. I do think there's a lot of not thinking about that, right? Not thinking about the employees' experience with a lot of this logistics and process, and you really bog people down. And lastly, how do you prove the monetary value of this, right? Because you got to set a price somehow. I don't know if it's per user or volume. I don't know what your pricing model is, but how do you say, here's the price for using us, and your ROI on this is going to be 10 times because you'll either save employee time or bring in more revenue? How do you go through that conversation?
It's multifaceted. So I'll give you an example. I mentioned Deloitte earlier, right? So Deloitte was able to identify a 30% reduction in support tickets that their employees were submitting through various experiences, whether through the new hire onboarding process. They have us deployed on over 100 apps. So that's an example of a very direct cost savings. We have another major retailer that we're working with that has, in the initial pilot phase, realized $2 million in increased revenue from solving the problem of customer service agents providing credits and rebates on products, on merchandise that were out of policy, right? They were making exceptions more times than they should have, right? So providing those call center agents with guidance is another example. And I'll give you one more example, which is a company in the health space. So Christus Health was able to see over $1 million additional in a year in getting payments from patients because of the guidance that they were able to provide their agents on how to go through the process and follow the policies.
$1 million a year, that's real money, right?
That's real money.
That's very direct. So interesting. I think, having gotten through into the details of this, I think we'll all go back and look at our own workflows, our own experience with difficult software, right? How are we getting through this process so that people can pay us, or we can do the basic things that our job requires, but is not actually the point of the job, right? Days off, expenses, and all the other little processes, new software updates, did this button move, are there exceptions? I think you're right. I think it gets in the way of the real purpose of the company. And I'm excited that we had this conversation, because I think the next 5 years are really going to get really, really crazy. I like what you said. The AI we use today is the worst AI that we'll ever use. Or the iPhone is a good example, right? When you go back now 5, 10, 15 years ago, at the time that iPhone seemed really interesting. And now if you were to be given that iPhone, you'd be like, I can't use this thing. This thing literally doesn't work. It's not at all up to speed. So that may be a similar path that we see with AI and how all of this changes.
Remember the iPod?
Yeah, I remember the iPod. Yeah, doesn't even exist anymore, right? And that's what's funny too, right? Like, the iPhone was just an iPod that had a full screen, and they stuck a phone on it, right? Like, all of this really stems from the iPod, which we forget now, and it's all disappeared. So I have a lot to ponder. This makes me it gets my mind going. I wish we could sit here and talk about this for a couple hours, but we'll have to get you back here and do this again. Adriel, I appreciate the time today.
Thanks a lot, Eric.
Thank you to my guest, and thanks for listening. Subscribe to get the latest episodes each week, and we'll see you next time.